Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. And today we are talking about Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, which technically leaning more on the side of comedy, but there's certainly enough horror imagery and iconography and references in there that it counts. This is a film that is obviously continuing the trend of these legacy sequels that we've been getting so much of in the past few years. So when they first announced that they were doing one for Beetlejuice, my initial reaction was just kind of like, why? As far as like the first movie goes, I rewatched the first movie a couple days ago just to get prepared for this one. The first film is so charming. There's a lot to love about it. I get why people have nostalgia for it. I don't quite have the same nostalgia for the first film that a lot of people do. I do remember watching it as a kid, but it just wasn't a film that I went back to. I feel like that's because when kids my age were getting into Beetlejuice and Ghostbusters and like all of those kinds of films, I was already watching stuff like Halloween and Friday the 13th, like the Elm Street film. I was very much into like the actual like horror stuff at that time. So I don't have that same nostalgia for it that I know a lot of people do. So my initial reaction to this one and it coming out this year was just like uninterested at first. I mean, this one did at least have the advantage of having some of the original like creative team, right? Not just like the actors, but also of course having Tim Burton involved in it. And then it really wasn't until I rewatched the original film that I became more interested in seeing what they were going to do with this new one. And I was really interested to see what they were going to actually do with the Beetlejuice character. Michael Keaton, of course, is amazing in the first film, and I think the reason why he works so well in the original is because his screen time is very limited, right? He's actually not in it that much. I think if we had gotten like too much of his character, it would have just gotten annoying after a while. It's very like meticulously paced throughout the 90 minutes. So I was curious if they were going to keep up with that here. So I think this new film works because Beetlejuice is there, but he's not the sole focus of the movie. You get him in like bits and pieces, which I think is what works really well for this character. Not to say that there aren't moments in here that feel bloated or a bit overblown or maybe a bit too much, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Overall, I had a lot of fun with this movie, and it's one of those movies where you're gonna know already if you want to see this film or not. So I'm just here to kind of give my general thoughts on it. There will be spoilers towards the end of the video. I know, it was just kind of the movie that came at the right time where it was like, yes, I will gladly go sit in a theater and turn my brain off for an hour and 45 minutes and just watch something fun and colorful. And it was great to see everyone like back together again, right? You have Michael Keaton, Winona Ryder, Catherine O'Hara. Like, it was just fun seeing them stepping back into these roles. If you are a huge fan of the original film, it's gonna like wrap you in that nice, warm, cozy nostalgia blanket. For the people that tend to find these things kind of annoying, or just the constant use of nostalgia as a narrative tool, right? The constant fan service moments, the constant callbacks to the original. There are definitely things in Beetlejuice that you'll probably find annoying, right? It's not completely immune to utilizing fan service or using callbacks from the original film to help tell its story. For example, the shrunken head guy, that was just kind of a one-off gag in the first film. Like, I think we only saw that guy like once or twice, whereas in this one, like, the shrunken head guys are just, well, first there's multiple of them and they're just like around and running around the whole film. I did not realize that that character was as iconic as he was from the original film, but they were also in all of the Beetlejuice theme ads that we got before the movie. Like, I don't know about you, but in our theater they showed us like ads for, I think it was IHOP and that CarMax commercial like multiple times. And I think we got more Beetlejuice themed commercials than we got previews for upcoming films. But the shrunken head guys were in like all of the advertisement as well. So I was like, oh, okay, I guess these really are like fan favorites. And you know, even with all of this fan service and trying to give like context to one-off jokes in the original, even with all of that, and while that can get a bit annoying, I do think this is one of the better like legacy sequels that we've gotten. It does keep with the feel of the original film and the original worlds that the film brought us into. You do have characters from the original that are coming back, and yes, it feels like we are genuinely watching older versions of these characters. Like sometimes with these legacy sequels, you have characters from original properties that come in, and something about them just feels kind of off, right? Like they just don't feel like well written, whereas I feel like here, at least, it felt like a natural progression for these characters. At first I was a little bit hesitant on Lydia's character because I was like, really, she like grew up to be a ghost hunter? But also, you know, as someone that also identified as a strange and unusual child and is now, you know, mid-30s and a bit bitter and cynical about the world, like I could see how she could make that transition into adulthood. And I feel like Michael Keaton, like obviously the standout in this movie, but he just slips back into that Beetlejuice character like so easily. And I don't know if it's just because of the makeup that he's wearing. Like, yes, he definitely seems older. He definitely presents as an older version of this character, but there's something about him that also feels very timeless. In many ways, it feels like he hasn't aged like at all. He's definitely the highlight of this film, right? Every scene that he's in is just a joy to watch. And again, I think it works because this film actually doesn't feel like cynical in the way that some of these other legacy sequels do. And I think that feeling comes from just the very obvious way that studios are using these legacy sequels as like easy cash grabs. And sure, you could make the argument that this film is definitely one of those as well. However, because everyone is having so much fun on this set, and because Tim Burton is just coming in and being at his like peak Tim Burton-ness, like I feel like this is one of the best films that he's done in a really long time. It's able to kind of transcend that like cynical, we're here just to make money feeling. Everyone is having a good time and they want you as the audience to have a good time. As far as other standouts for me in this film, Willem Dafoe. I adore this man. He's one of my favorite actors of all time. And it was great just getting to see him in this role, especially playing this like dead actor who used to play a cop. And so he's still playing like a cop role in the underworld, but also still being this like obnoxious, self-centered actor. Like, it was amazing. You could tell with him that he's also having just like such a great time playing this character. And I loved it. I loved the scenes where he is playing this cop and he has like shrunken head guy, Bob, I think his name is, and he's interrogating him and he's playing it like it's a serious like police procedural. I was cracking up the whole time with that scene. We get a couple of scenes with like him and Michael Keaton, and just seeing them together, like, I mean, chef's kiss. That was cinematic gold right there, is getting to watch these two like incredible actors just get to play off each other and just have fun. I was watching it and I was like, I had no idea that this is what I needed in my life, but I am so glad that this exists. I kind of wish the whole film would have been just the two of them. I mean, again, I think it probably would have been like too much. I could have taken just like a 15-minute film of just those two playing off of each other and it would be like one of the best films ever made. Other standouts in this movie, Catherine O'Hara. It's great to see her back. She's another one where she slips back into her character just so easily. And I do love in this film that Delia has gone from being like weird sculpture art to now just making weird like video art. I thought that was very funny and cute. Justin Theroux was actually a surprise standout for me. He's another one where he's just kind of like hamming it up and playing this really sleazy TV producer. But again, you can tell that he's just having a blast getting to play a role like this. There is just a infectiousness about this film where you can tell that the performers are happy and are joyous to be in this role. And so that definitely reflects back onto you as the audience. And I think that's what makes this film work, even though I will say I do feel like the narrative is a bit cluttered. There's a lot of threads that are being woven throughout this movie, and I don't think all of them tie together that well. I did enjoy Winona Ryder in this film. I did like Jenny Ortega. However, I have to be honest, like they weren't necessarily the standouts for me in this movie. I just feel like they kind of got overshadowed by some of the other more outrageous characters. And I think part of the reason too why I also felt that is, you know, their characters are kind of meant to be more of the, I guess, anchors in this very like bizarre Tim Burton world. They're the ones that definitely have the most emotional storylines. They're the ones that definitely have the biggest character arcs or changes throughout the film. However, I feel like this connects back to what I was just saying. Because the film is trying to do so much and because it's trying to throw so much in there, a lot of times what you get is moments that happen very fast. Everything is very quick in this movie. There's not a lot of time to just kind of pause and breathe and kind of take in some of the emotion. And even when like characters are dying and passing over into the other world and the person that has passed on is like, well, I'm dead now. And then the characters that are still alive are like, oh, that's sad. Okay, well, bye. It's not like the original film like had a lot of these sentimental moments in it. But I do think what you get with like Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin's characters in the first film, I feel like I got more of an emotional like punch from them in their storyline and their arc. And I think it's because the original film had a much more simpler story, that it was easy to get more into the psychology of all of these characters, whereas you don't really get that here because it's trying to cram like so much within its hour and 45-minute runtime. And so when you're having these like big emotional scenes with like Winona Ryder and Jenny Ortega, right, they're supposed to have this mother-daughter relationship, it all felt a bit, again, quick and very like surface level, and I was kind of like, okay, well, what did these characters like really learn? Like, I don't know, there just wasn't the emotional beat there that I needed, right? I needed the film to just kind of like pause for just like a few seconds so we could have that emotional beat and then move on to the next hijink. I don't really feel like I understood their relationship. I mean, yes, I get it. Mother, daughter, fighting, you know, we've seen it before in movies, especially in these legacy sequels where you have original characters that are having children and then the children don't like get along with them because they're so caught up in their trauma from the past. I kind of wish the film had maybe taken some unnecessary stuff away and maybe focused more on this relationship between the mother and daughter. I don't really know how Lydia feels about being a mom. I know she loves her daughter, but I would have been really curious to understand what that process, right, the role of becoming a mom, what that meant to her, because all we really get from her is like, oh yeah, my daughter hates me. And yeah, they kind of do something with like her ex-husband. Again, all of that happens like very quickly and is wrapped up very quickly. So I don't know, I feel like I would have enjoyed their characters more, again, if I had that like emotional attachment to them. I think at this point I'll probably get into spoilers to talk about the ending. So if you haven't seen the film yet, now's the time to click off. Okay, so getting into spoilers for the ending. To me, the third act felt like the weakest part of this movie. There's the whole like wedding thing with Winona Ryder's character with Justin Theroux, and then Beetlejuice is coming in. And this is like what I was saying earlier, where it's like they're having all of these threads and they're trying to bring them all together, but none of it's really having that satisfying of a conclusion. You have the conflict with Jenny Ortega and her love interest being a ghost, right? And tricking her into going into the underworld. That conflict gets resolved very quickly, and that's when they run into like Jenny Ortega's, her character's father. They have their brief family moment. And again, I would have liked a bit more of an emotional beat there because that all gets resolved very quickly as well, and then it's kind of like forgotten about. There were just some things like that that felt kind of unnecessary, and I was like, I feel like you could have still told this story had this element been taken out of it. You also have the stuff with Monica Bellucci's character, which definitely feels like the most pointless stuff in this film, right? They make a whole big deal about her at the beginning, right, when she's coming back alive, and I actually really loved that scene at the beginning. I thought that was very cool visually, where all of her body parts are just like scattered in these boxes and we're just seeing her assembling herself back together again. I really liked that. And then the whole conflict with her being the wife of Beetlejuice and her trying to get revenge, and she's spending the whole time just like stalking the underworld and looking for him. And then it's like we finally get to the climax, like this big moment where you're kind of expecting this big, you know, battle between her and the rest of the characters, and she just gets eaten by a sandworm, and that's like it. I don't know if her and like Beetlejuice even really had that much of a conversation together. Beetlejuice!
What the f?
So that threat is neutralized very quickly. And again, not really like that satisfying in terms of like having the characters having to overcome some personal flaw in order to defeat this big bad. It's just like, okay, well, here's a sandworm. Remember this from the first film? Here it is as a way to resolve conflict. That feels a little cheap. I felt like all the stuff with her character was just kind of useless, and I was like, okay, if you weren't really going to do much with this character, we could have spent this screen time fleshing out the characters of Lydia and her daughter. Also, I don't know, but I kind of like in the original film that we don't know that much about Beetlejuice and his backstory. Like, he's kind of this weird enigma that we as the audience can kind of come up with our own stories about. Here they try to do the thing where it's like, okay, here's a little bit more into his backstory and who he is. I don't know, I just didn't feel like I needed it for that character. I feel like he works better when he is just this kind of like trickster archetype that appears and causes chaos. I did find out this morning that I guess Monica Bellucci and Tim Burton are dating, which kind of blew my mind. And I was like, okay, I get it, because, you know, Tim Burton is one of these directors that obviously likes to put his lady front and center in a movie. And she looked great, but again, just not a lot of like substance there. She didn't add much to the overall story. So I feel like that was my biggest thing with the ending, where it was like all of these threads were happening. And as I was watching the movie, I was like, there's a lot going on here, right? Between Winona Ryder and Justin Theroux's Beetlejuice trying to outrun his ex-wife and still wanting to marry Winona Ryder's character for some reason, Jenny Ortega and her ghost boyfriend, Delia and her weird artwork, and the fact that she gets herself killed later on and is then in the underworld. Willem Dafoe as like this fake cop trying to find Beetlejuice. Like there's just like so much going on. There's like 4 or 5 different stories happening at any one time. And I was curious to see how they were gonna bring it all together. And yeah, I just fell flat. I just felt like everything got resolved so quickly and easily, and there wasn't really that much conflict there. Again, I think what worked so well about the original is that it was this simple story. You're having strong themes coming through around appreciating life, right? Appreciating being part of the living. I feel like that's something that Lydia learns throughout the first film. Also the thing with like Adam and Barbara and them having to accept that they've passed over and accepting that death is just a natural part of life, and that by remembering the ones that have passed over, we keep them alive. It's kind of going on those themes. You do get some of that here, but again, it feels a little bit forced. Like at the end, Winona Ryder is like, I've come to the realization that I spend too much time talking about death, and now I'm going to be part of the living. It's like, okay, sure, it's fine, like it works. I feel like we've seen it before. I feel like you went through a similar arc in the first film. So I guess I wish maybe some of these narrative threads had played a bigger role in establishing the themes of the movie and helping the character arcs of Winona Ryder and Jenny Ortega's character. Like the whole thing with Delia dying, I don't know, I didn't really like the way that they killed her off. Like it was funny, but it felt like her death, since this film is kind of focusing on like this generations of women in this family. It felt like her death could have been a bigger moment in terms of, again, helping Winona Ryder or Jenny Ortega's character learn some lesson. Like it felt like that should have been a slightly bigger moment than it was. Again, it was one of those things where she was like, okay, well, I'm dead now. And they were like, okay, well, we'll miss you. And again, I know that the first film didn't get that sentimental, and I'm not saying that I needed everyone to just like break down and cry and have a meltdown about Delia passing over, but that was, again, one of those moments where I was like, I wish the film had just paused a little bit and allowed the characters to breathe a little bit. I guess you do have Winona Ryder who is saying like, oh, I'm gonna like focus on the living from now on, but again, I think if the narrative threads had come together better, I think if the story had been a little bit more simpler, that moment probably would have worked better, because where it stands, like everything just felt very chaotic and again just kind of wrapped up quickly. Speaking of the sandworm, I believe in interviews Tim Burton and Michael Keaton have talked about how they used practical effects in this movie. And yes, for the most part, I think you can see that they are using practical effects. I don't know if that's true of the sandworm. The sandworm looked a little CGI to me. It might have been a practical effect that they then enhanced with CGI, but there was just something about the look of it that felt, I'm going to say artificial, which sounds silly because in the first film, obviously it's a very artificial monster. But I know there was just something about like the movement of it that just felt very like computer generated CGI. I know, I just wasn't a fan of the way that they used the sandworm in this movie. You're not having the great moment with it like in the original film when Gina Davis is just like writing it in order to stop Beetlejuice. Like we don't get one of those like great character moments with it. This is one of those films where it feels like you can take individual moments of it, right? You can take little like vignettes that it has here and there. Those moments isolated work so well. It's just like when it all tries to come together that, I don't know, it just like loses something. I don't think this film had the same charm that the original film has, and I think that's just because it is trying to do too much. There's just not enough time to really like go deep into any one of these storylines, and any one of these storylines could have worked by itself had they chosen to just focus on it. I guess Tim Burton just had too many ideas that he wanted to put into the sequel, and they claim to say that they're not going to do a third film. This is on track to make a lot of money at the box office, so we'll see if that remains true by the end of this weekend. I will say I did enjoy like the very ending of the movie, right? The kind of button at the end. I could see why some people wouldn't like this or just kind of find it annoying, but I liked the whole thing with Jenny Ortega and she's getting married and then she's like having this baby, and the baby of course comes out as like baby Beetlejuice, and it's this very grotesque. And of course, it's just a nightmare that Winona Ryder's character is having. I don't know, to me that just felt like a nice homage to like classic horror. It was kind of reminding me of something like Carrie or like Rosemary's Baby, right? We were having this very nice music coming in, so then it's just like this really horrific thing happens. Or even something like The Fly with Gina Davis. That whole nightmare sequence of her giving birth to a really grotesque monster, like it was giving those vibes. So those are my overall thoughts on Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. Again, I enjoyed it for what it is. Is this a film that I will go back to? Maybe. I'll probably still just stick to the original film if I feel like going back into this world. Let me know your thoughts on the film. What did you love about it? What did you hate about it? Did it work for you? Did it not? Do you think it lives up to the greatness of the original? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.